17,000 islands scattered like emeralds across the equator. This is Indonesia, a land where fire and water meet. Volcanoes rise from the sea, their eruptions shaping the soil and the destiny of those who live upon it. The seas that surround these islands are not barriers, but bridges. For thousands of years, they have carried traders, pilgrims, and conquerors. They have carried ideas, faiths, and dreams. Indonesia is not one story, but thousands. It is the story of ancient humans who walked these lands long before history was written. It is the story of kingdoms that rose and fell, of temples carved from stone, of merchants who carried spices worth more than gold. It is the story of colonizers who came from across the ocean and of a people who fought to reclaim their freedom. To understand Indonesia is to understand resilience. It is to see how cultures blend, how identities shift, and how unity can be forged from diversity. Over the next 2 hours, we will journey through millennia, from the dawn of humanity to the modern nation that stands today as the world's fourth most populous country. This is the entire history of Indonesia. Our story begins more than 1 million years ago. On the island of Java, scientists uncovered the remains of Homo erectus, known as Java Man. These fossils tell us that Indonesia has been home to humanity for longer than almost anywhere else on Earth. Imagine a world of dense forests, roaring rivers, and volcanic plains, where early humans hunted, gathered, and survived. Fast forward to around 2000 BCE, a new wave of people arrived, the Austronesians. They were master sailors, setting out from Taiwan in outrigger canoes. Guided only by stars, winds, and waves, they carried with them rice seeds, pigs, chickens, and the knowledge of farming. They brought languages that would spread across the Pacific, from Madagascar to Hawaii. Picture families loading their canoes with not just food and tools, but with stories, songs, and beliefs. They crossed vast oceans, settling island after island, until they reached the shores of what we now call Indonesia. Here, they built villages, carved rice terraces, and laid the cultural foundations that still shape the archipelago today.
By the 7th century, the islands were no longer isolated villages. In Sumatra, a great power emerged, the Srivijaya Empire. Unlike land empires, Srivijaya ruled the seas. Its strength lay in its control of the Malacca Strait, the narrow passage through which the wealth of Asia flowed. Chinese silk, Indian textiles, Arabian horses all passed through Srivijaya's ports. In return, the empire offered spices, gold, and forest products. Its rulers grew rich. Its cities bustled with merchants from across the world. But Srivijaya was not just a marketplace. It was a center of learning. Buddhist monks from as far as China came here to study. The empire became a beacon of knowledge, where religion and commerce intertwined. For centuries, Srivijaya thrived, its fleets patrolling the seas, its rulers commanding respect from distant courts. It was the first great Indonesian empire, a maritime kingdom that showed the world the power of the islands.
While Srivijaya ruled the seas, Central Java became home to one of humanity's greatest monuments, Borobudur. Built in the 8th and 9th centuries by the Sailendra dynasty, Borobudur is the largest Buddhist temple on earth. Imagine a mountain of stone rising from the jungle. 9 stacked platforms crowned by a great stupa. Its walls are covered with thousands of carvings, stories of the Buddha's life, lessons of compassion, visions of enlightenment. Pilgrims would walk its terraces in meditation, ascending from the earthly realm to the spiritual. Nearby, Hindu kingdoms flourished too. The Prambanan temple complex, dedicated to Shiva, rose with towering spires. Java became a crossroads of faith, where Hinduism and Buddhism blended with local traditions. These temples were not just places of worship, they were symbols of power, of devotion, and of the creativity of the Javanese people.
In the 13th century, a new power rose in East Java, the Majapahit Empire. Under the leadership of Gajah Mada, its legendary prime minister, Majapahit expanded across the archipelago. Its fleets sailed to Sumatra, Borneo, even the Philippines. Majapahit's courts were centers of art and literature. Poets composed epics like the Nagara Kretagama, celebrating the empire's glory. Dancers performed elaborate rituals, musicians played gamelan, and artisans crafted works of beauty. For many Indonesians today, Majapahit represents a golden age, a time when the islands were united under one banner. Though its power eventually faded, Majapahit left behind a vision of unity that would inspire future generations, including the leaders of modern Indonesia.
By the 13th century, the winds of change were blowing across the archipelago. They carried not only ships filled with cloth, ceramics, and spices, but also new ideas, new beliefs, and a new faith. Islam arrived in Indonesia not with armies or conquest, but with merchants. Traders from Gujarat, Arabia, and Persia sailed into ports like Aceh, Demak, and Gresik, bringing with them not only goods, but also stories of the Prophet, teachings of the Quran, and ways of life that resonated with local communities. Unlike the dramatic conversions seen in other parts of the world, Islam in Indonesia spread gradually, peacefully, and organically. A fisherman might learn a prayer from a trader. A local ruler might marry into a Muslim family. A market town might build a small mosque beside its stalls. Over time, these seeds grew into forests of faith. But Islam in Indonesia did not erase what came before. Instead, it blended. Mosques were built with tiered roofs resembling Hindu temples. Islamic calligraphy intertwined with batik patterns. Old rituals were reinterpreted through new lenses. This fusion created a uniquely Indonesian Islam, one that was deeply spiritual, yet flexible, rooted in tradition, yet open to adaptation. By the 16th century, most of the archipelago's rulers had embraced Islam. The great Hindu-Buddhist kingdoms faded, replaced by Islamic sultanates like Demak, Mataram, and Aceh. These sultanates became centers of trade, culture, and power. Islam had reshaped the political and spiritual landscape of Indonesia, preparing it for the next great chapter of its history.
In 1512, sails appeared on the horizon. They belonged to the Portuguese, the first Europeans to reach the fabled Spice Islands. For centuries, nutmeg, cloves, and pepper had been worth more than gold in Europe. Now Europeans wanted direct access to these treasures. The Portuguese seized forts and tried to dominate the trade, but they were soon challenged by another rising power, the Dutch. In 1602, the Dutch East India Company, the VOC, was founded. It was the world's first multinational corporation, with shareholders, armies, and navies. The VOC was not just a trading company, it was a state within a state. The Dutch built forts, seized islands, and forced local rulers into contracts. They monopolized nutmeg in the Banda Islands, cloves in Maluku, and pepper in Java. Villages that resisted were burned, populations massacred, and survivors enslaved. The VOC's wealth flowed to Amsterdam, funding canals, palaces, and the Dutch Golden Age. For Indonesians, however, this was an age of hardship. Farmers were forced to grow crops for export instead of food. Local rulers lost autonomy. Yet resistance never disappeared. From small uprisings to organized rebellions, Indonesians fought back, even as the VOC tightened its grip. By the 18th century, the VOC was one of the richest companies in the world, but corruption, wars, and mismanagement weakened it. In 1800, the company collapsed, and the Dutch crown took direct control. The islands were no longer just a trading post, they were now a colony, the Dutch East Indies.
The 19th century was a time of transformation. Under direct Dutch rule, the archipelago became a colony designed to serve European interests. Plantations spread across Java, producing coffee, sugar, and tobacco for export. The infamous cultivation system forced farmers to devote a portion of their land to cash crops. The result was famine, poverty, and suffering for millions. Yet even in this dark time, resistance burned. Prince Diponegoro led a massive rebellion in Java from 1825 to 1830, a war that cost hundreds of thousands of lives. In Maluku, Patimura rose against colonial forces. Though these uprisings were crushed, they became symbols of defiance, remembered for generations. The Dutch also built railways, schools, and cities, but these were designed to extract wealth, not to uplift the people. Education was limited, reserved for elites who could serve colonial administration. Still, those who gained access to knowledge began to dream of something more. They read about nationalism, independence, and self-determination. By the early 20th century, a new generation of Indonesians was emerging. They formed organizations like Budi Otomo and Sarekat Islam. They wrote newspapers, gave speeches, and began to imagine a future beyond colonial rule. The seeds of nationalism had been planted, and soon they would grow into a movement that could not be stopped.
World War II shattered the colonial order. In 1942, Japanese forces swept into Indonesia, driving out the Dutch. For 3 years, Indonesians lived under harsh occupation. Food was scarce, forced labor was common, and dissent was crushed. Yet the Japanese also weakened Dutch control, training Indonesians in administration and the military. When Japan surrendered in August 1945, a power vacuum opened. Sukarno and Muhammad Hatta seized the moment. On August 17, 1945, they proclaimed independence. Across the archipelago, radios crackled with the words of Sukarno. "We, the people of Indonesia, hereby declare the independence of Indonesia." But freedom was not easily won. The Dutch tried to return, sparking 4 years of war. Villages were bombed, cities besieged, and thousands died. Yet the Indonesian people refused to surrender. Guerrilla fighters battled in jungles and mountains. Diplomats lobbied the world. Finally, in 1949, under international pressure, the Dutch recognized Indonesia's independence. A new nation was born, forged in struggle, baptized in sacrifice, and united by hope. The dream of unity, once imagined by Majapahit centuries earlier, had become reality.
The early years of independence were turbulent. Sukarno, Indonesia's first president, dreamed of unity. He promoted nationalism, religion, and communism as the 3 pillars of the nation. But his guided democracy faced turmoil. Regional rebellions erupted. The economy faltered. The Cold War cast its shadow, with the United States and the Soviet Union vying for influence. In 1965, a failed coup attempt led to chaos. General Suharto rose to power, blaming communists for the unrest. What followed was one of the darkest chapters in Indonesian history, mass killings that claimed hundreds of thousands of lives. By 1967, Suharto had replaced Sukarno as president. Suharto's New Order regime brought stability and rapid economic growth. Highways, factories, and skyscrapers rose. Foreign investment poured in. For 3 decades, Indonesia was hailed as a success story. But beneath the surface, repression silenced dissent. Corruption flourished, and power was concentrated in the hands of a few. Then came the Asian financial crisis of 1997. The economy collapsed. Prices soared. Millions lost jobs. Students and workers took to the streets, demanding change. In May 1998, after 32 years in power, Suharto resigned. Indonesia entered a new era, reformasi. Democracy returned, and with it, new freedoms and challenges. The nation began to rebuild, to decentralize, and to redefine itself.
Today, Indonesia is the world's 4th most populous nation, home to more than 270 million people. It is the largest Muslim-majority country, yet it is also home to Christians, Hindus, Buddhists, and countless indigenous beliefs. Its motto, Bhinneka Tunggal Ika, unity in diversity, reflects the challenge and the triumph of holding together thousands of islands, hundreds of ethnic groups, and hundreds of languages. Indonesia's democracy is vibrant, though imperfect. Elections are noisy, passionate, and fiercely contested. Its economy is rising, fueled by natural resources, manufacturing, and a growing middle class. Jakarta's skyline gleams with skyscrapers, while Bali draws millions of tourists each year. Yet challenges remain. Inequality, corruption, environmental destruction, and regional tensions test the nation's resilience. But Indonesia has always been a land of resilience. From the sailors who crossed oceans thousands of years ago, to the kingdoms that rose and fell, to the revolutionaries who fought for independence, the Indonesian people have always adapted, endured, and overcome. Indonesia today is like a vast orchestra. Each island, each culture, each tradition is an instrument. Alone, they are distinct. Together, they create a symphony, sometimes chaotic, sometimes harmonious, but always powerful. And that symphony is still being written. The story of Indonesia is not finished. It continues every day in the lives of its people. Thank you for joining us on this adventure. If you enjoyed this exploration of the entire history of Indonesia, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your journey is just beginning, and we can't wait to see where it takes you next.